We have issued 2 new publications under the Nordic Baltic project. So the first one mostly looks at narratives, so what narratives are and how could we potentially define hostile narrative and how these hostile narratives can be operationalized to influence public opinion and actually lead to specific behaviors or policy decisions within a country. And it also gives an introduction to what we call information laundering online. The publication that focuses on information laundering online is a very interesting methodology which allows to look at the whole process in its complexity. So often we are used to looking at specific parts, for example a certain article about disinformation, or for example a fake account that is spreading some kind of a disinformation piece, but this methodology allows to trace the whole process starting from placement and then going through all the layers of amplifying this disinformation using different techniques, such as for example deceitful translation or woozle effect, which means deliberately misusing a quote from a recognized, publicly recognized person or media outlet, and thus legitimizing this disinformation. So specifically we have looked at cases that involve official Kremlin-funded outlets such as Sputnik and RT, for example, and then we see a very big range of actors in all Nordic Baltic countries who actually contribute to this process either by accident, so we call those accidental actors, or then actors whose needs it serves, and thus they support the Kremlin agenda. This methodology is very useful to understand the holistic approach in this process and identify networks of different actors that often, as we noted, go beyond actually national borders, and they coordinate the activity and they support each other in, for example, either disinforming the national population or creating a specific image about a country abroad. This methodology has been tested in the Nordic Baltic information environment, but at the same time it is unique because it can be applied in any kind of context outside of the Nordic Baltic region and looking at different kind of foreign actors who try to influence the nation state or a region. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a Kremlin official funded outlet. It can be used for different kinds of contexts.
We hope you found this video very useful. Methodologies are crucial for robust analysis, and robust analysis of hostile information campaigns and their methods are a very crucial step in, first of all, rapid detection of these campaigns and disruption of these campaigns. So this is the topic of today's discussion. And we have brought together an excellent set of experts to tackle this, explain the information laundering and how to disrupt this process. First of all, we have Belén Carrasco Rodríguez, who is the author of this report, and she's also an intelligence analyst at Neo-Century. Her work focuses on the intersection between open source intelligence and strategic communications, with an emphasis on supporting public and private organizations to build online resilience. We also have Nika Aleksejeva, who is the lead digital forensics researcher at NATO Stockholm COE. And NATO Stockholm COE joint project with Atlantic Council, the DRFLab. And Nika's specific research interest is tracking and preventing spread of disinformation on digital engagement spaces, being social media, online news, blogs, or forums in the Baltic States and beyond. Unfortunately, it is an all-female panel, or as they call it, womanal. We try to get male experts as well, but there are just so few of them in the field. So we'll just start right away with the questions. So Belén, can you explain a little bit more why was the term information laundering chosen to describe the process?
Well, hi Nora. Thank you for the presentation, and thanks the COE for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. So why information laundering? Well, the concept of information laundering utilizes a metaphor of money laundering to describe and visualize the life cycle of hostile information influence activities. Like money laundering tries to conceal money obtained through illicit activities. Information laundering is aimed at providing a facade of legitimacy to false information. So basically, it occurs when a network of actors produces and legitimizes false or deceitful information through the application of a set of techniques that decontextualize it and obscure the original source. So basically, you wash the information and it becomes clean. The concept of information laundering and also emphasizes the fact that this is a process. This is a comprehensive and progressive process of manipulation of data and manipulation of audiences' perception in order to spread influence in a cheap and efficient way. So I think that one of the clearest examples to introduce information laundering here is to look at QAnon or other conspiracy theories, which start as marginal narratives in fringe websites or forums, and through the application of sets of different techniques aimed at different purposes, they make their way to the mainstream online discourse and mainstream media. So yeah, if we can see the slide of the framework developed by the COE to research information laundering processes, the previous one, yes. We see that as a metaphor of money laundering, information laundering consists of 3 phases. The first phase would be the placement, where the first actor applies the first technique to the information, starting the laundering process. Then this will be followed by a layering process, where a set of actors applies subsequently and progressively a set of techniques that further launder the piece of information. And finally, we have the integration phase, when the laundered information becomes part of the public discourse. So we can see now here display the 8 techniques that we have identified as a part of information laundering processes. They are aimed at different objectives. We have techniques that are aimed at increasing the visibility of the laundered piece, for example, automated translation or smurfing cases. Then also techniques aimed at obscure the source of the real source of the information, for example, misappropriations and Wuzel effect. And well, the techniques that suggest a more coordinated type of activity would be Potemkin villages and smurfing. And these processes are, like the actors that conduct information laundering processes, are supported by cyber capabilities and benefit from the inauthentic amplification through social media. I think, yeah.
Thank you, Belén. I know Elena, in her video, she kind of touched upon on the benefits of developing a methodology and a framework, but could you expand on it? Like, what is the value added of this research and the methodology that you have developed?
Well, if we see the framework developed by the COE to research information laundering processes, again, we, and of course, as Elena mentioned in the video, we see that one of the main benefits of the methodology that we developed to investigate this sort of processes is that it takes a holistic approach to the research of hostile information influence campaigns. So it helps to trace and understand the root of a piece of information since it's fabricated to until it is accepted as legitimate. So it doesn't only identify particular narratives or particular techniques, but by taking this holistic approach, we can see all the actors that are involved and participate in this type of processes, the dynamics between the actors, and of course, it's like the techniques apply and the effects that these techniques can have. Also, this framework enjoys, like, it is a flexible framework. So our aim creating this model was to produce a standardized analytical framework that could be applied to different media environments and to information influence activities conducted by actors of different nature. So for example, we first apply this framework to 32 case studies of information laundering by Kremlin or pro-Kremlin media in the Nordic Baltic region. And then we exported this model to investigate information laundering cases conducted by pro-Kremlin media targeting COVID-19 narratives and Navalny, disinformation targeting Navalny too in Germany. And finally, now at Neon Century, we have utilized this model to investigate information laundering processes not perpetrated by state actors, but by individual actors or groups targeting other individuals or corporations within the context of the US election. because of the flexibility of the framework, it also allows us to apply the framework to different cases and different domestic media environments. It allows us also to compare between different countries and different domestic media environments and draw patterns, similarities, and differences. And finally, one of the main benefits that I think that this framework brings is it's very good at exposing the vulnerabilities of the domestic media environment.
Okay, thank you. So lots of good work and research in different countries that you can find on NATO Stockholm COE website. So the research on Germany is also available on NATO Stockholm COE's website. So make sure you go and check it out. But a question for Belén again. So you mentioned that you analyzed all these countries where the Kremlin information campaigns are present. Were there any challenges, and if yes, what were the challenges in applying this framework to Nordic Baltic, Germany, or other places where you applied it?
Of course, I mean there were plenty of challenges. If we can see the next slide, we can see that one of like the first challenge that we encountered was the complexity and nature of the networks, as they are essentially transnational. So here we this is just like a graphic that shows that the domestic media that enables the spread of pro-Kremlin influence within a particular domestic media environment, it doesn't only enables the spread in that in the country that the media or the actor is from, but also participates in information laundering processes in other Nordic Baltic countries. So to this, apart from this, we have like high participation from international media outlets and Russian domain, Russian language media outlets. As information laundering actors generally utilize information laundering techniques or either to launder news events in domestic media to influence national audiences, but also to target domestic news and translate them and portray certain image about the country to international audiences. We see that, I mean, the complexity of this process implies that information laundering processes generally occur across different countries in different languages, and sometimes there are like over 100 actors involved. So this was one of the main limitations, and also there's plenty of limitations surrounding the attribution and intent of the actor, which we try to overcome by we focused on the behavior of an actor around a specific piece of content, and so we cannot say this actor is behind the information laundering process, but we can say this actor has repetitively participated by conducting these techniques in these laundering processes in this and this country within this region, if that makes sense.
Okay, so to summarize, the main challenges were the complexity of the networks, the scale and the volume of information laundering and the networks involved, and the actor attribution. Did you just in this research, did you also look at how this laundered information behaves or travels in social media and public discourse on social media, or?
Yes, due to the complexity of the process, we focus mainly on media and digital media, online media platforms, but the social media research we didn't dive into. I'm sure that Nika can add a lot on this regard. We found that most of the placement, for example, were conducted in social media, and then this content was extracted, exported to and covered in different media platforms. And of course, just like as I said earlier, information laundering benefits from the artificial amplification in social media platforms.
Okay, so I guess a logical question would be for Nika now. So Nika, from your research, what have you seen, how does disinformation or laundered information travels on different social networks? Can you comment on it?
Hello, Nora. Hello, Belén. Hello, viewers. Yes, what really determines how disinformation travels on social media is algorithm, and each social media has slightly different one. For instance, on Facebook, it's really determined by the social network that people are connected at. But on TikTok, for instance, it's the viewership and videos that garner most views in first seconds, minutes, then get promoted farther. So algorithms change. That's why my answer today may change tomorrow. So there are two strategies how disinformation actors can actually get their disinformation, well, move on social media. And first strategy is having a content that engages people. Think about content that sparks emotions, that talks about controversial subjects, that maybe taps into some deeply rooted values. What people do, they like, they share, they comment, and this content becomes visible for their friends on Facebook or starts to be popular also on TikTok. The other strategy is repetition. For instance, there is an actor, and this actor has particular content that doesn't really engage people. But this actor at the same time can post content that does, for instance, kittens or marvelous places to travel and so on. And we saw it on Twitter. There was quite influential account before Latvian elections. And if you look at its tweets, original tweets, it's animals, it's beautiful images that actually garners retweets and likes. But the behavior was actually commenting, engaging in conversations. And if this actor actually attracts people with content and people starts following that actor, they also get exposed to other narratives that this actor communicates. And it's the way to lure people in. And the more you repeat your point, your narrative, the least critical or the more used people get to that narrative. And as time passes, this narrative doesn't seem surprising or that emotional anymore, and our brain converts it to be true. So it's long-term approach. It doesn't happen over a week or a month, or sometimes it takes multiple years. And at the same time, it's more sustainable approach. So either you have content that engages people, or you repeat your narrative to make it more true, seem more true.
Okay, very interesting. I immediately see that the techniques that Nika mentioned are some of them are very similar to the techniques that are used by Russian state-funded media, like this repetition of narratives until they seem true. So there are definitely some similarities between information and disinformation, information laundering and disinformation on media and social media. So I have another question for Nika. What are the methods that you and DRFLab uses to research these things on social media?
Sure. So there are two things how DRFLab uses social media. One is to observe trends and see patterns of how people, actors behave on social media. And the other big part is to use content posted on social media to verify. I will touch more on the first approach when we are looking into trends, but let me just briefly mention what I mean by verification. So we would look for images, videos that help us to verify place and time, and we would use it for geolocation. Or we would look for images of a person before a certain event, and we would use it for visual comparison. We would use visual comparison to recognize armor or military vehicles if it's military conflict that we are tracking. And also we would use it to verify authenticity of an actor. For instance, if there's a name and surname of an alleged author journalist, we would look that name up and try to see it on social media to see if that person exists and what that person does on its private networks. Okay, so now on the trends and pattern researching. So the biggest help in that are tools, off-the-shelf tools that help to monitor, to discover, and to see patterns. These tools are driven by big data, and what big data is pulled into these tools is largely determined by platforms themselves. For instance, before a couple of years, Facebook was more liberal with providing data through their API or application programming interface, but now only data that is available is about pages. Twitter data is still quite available, but it's also limited by, say, thousands of units that you can extract and analyze at a certain point of time. So these are the limitations imposed by platforms themselves to analyze. Nevertheless, these tools, like think of CrowdTangle for Facebook and Instagram, help us to notice if something suddenly becomes a trending topic. And when we see that topic, we are already looking into a timeline. When did it start to spread? What keywords does it use? Who are the main actors amplifying a story or fact or whatever piece of content that we are interested in? And this is how far these automated tools can lead us. And a big part of our work is actually manual work. And it's mostly applied when we need to check authenticity of accounts. But also if we need to work with, say, Facebook user data, because it's not available on these tools, we would go to particular user accounts, browse through their timelines, look at their photos, see if it's the same person, or maybe this person changed their gender. I mean, like, not like transitioned as with transgenders, but was a male and then completely different woman. We would compare if screen name matches with username that you can find in hyperlink. We would also check the list of friends if it's open, and if we just order them in chronological matter. Maybe at some point there was a big chunk of friends added from completely different part of the world, and that would suggest that this account bought friends to look bigger for other users, and so on. So we would look at behavior, and there is so much we can see, and that really depends on the platform. So cross-platform comparison of accounts, of brands, of actors is always necessary, and it helps us to determine who the actor is and what is its possible intent. I hope I gave a detailed enough idea of how we use social media.
Yes, so basically you use tools, ready-made tools for patterns and trend identification, and manual work for verification of events, places, accounts, and cross-platform comparison, and so on. So combination of tools and lots of manual work. But let me just draw us back to the main point of discussion, which is the information laundering report. So if I can ask another question to Belén, can you briefly summarize what were the main conclusions from your study of Kremlin information laundering in the Nordic Baltic region?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, this is a very comprehensive study, so I encourage you all to have a look at the publication at the COE website. But basically, the main conclusion is not only information laundering happens in every country, but also that in every country there are domestic actors that enable the spread of foreign hostile influence in the domestic media environment. So also tracking the use of the language within the information laundering process, we see that not only domestic audiences are targeted by information laundering actors, but Russian-speaking and international English-speaking mainly audiences are an important part. Why? Because there are some information laundering processes that instead of spreading influence in the domestic, across the domestic audience, they distort the image of a particular country to disseminate. For example, we have Denmark. There was just like a case saying this Denmark was allowing animal prostitution. It was false, evidently. This was the result of an information laundering process perpetrated by foreign hostile actors. They targeted Denmark, and they spread internationally through Russian-speaking and English-speaking audiences this idea of Western moral decay through just like the idea that Denmark was allowing animal prostitution. This is as an example, and then also another of the conclusions that our report draw is that rather than blunt disinformation, the most effective and the most used combination of techniques by information laundering actors is the combination between misappropriation and woozle effect. Woozle effect refers to the misuse of a real quote by a reputed public figure, let's say a politician, right? And so what we see is just like it's very common that in information laundering processes, information laundering actors take and decontextualize a real quote from politician and mix it through misappropriations with wrong context in order to portray an image that this person is saying something that he or she is not saying. Like briefly, as we said that one of the main values of the framework was that it allowed us to draw comparisons and identify patterns. I mean, one of the main conclusions also is like within the Nordic Baltic region, we identified 3 sub-regions that have in which like information laundering actors have different levels of activity. So the first region would be the Baltic States. And in the Baltic States, we find the most active pro-Kremlin information laundering networks with a prominent presence of Kremlin official media and pro-Kremlin media. And of course, it's important activity also of Russian domain, Russian language media and domestic Russian language media too. Then we have another sub-region conformed by Sweden, Finland, and Norway, where the key actors are pro-Kremlin media and proxies. Here, the proxies have special relevance in translating foreign information laundering in foreign language, let's say Russian language, into the domestic language, and then further launder it to disseminate it among the domestic audiences. And finally, we have Denmark and Iceland that, well, here the key actors are proxies and accidental actors, and the domestic actors have lesser weight in information laundering networks, but these are the countries that experience more amplification of processes of the laundered information. Just like, so the domestic actors are not so focused on further laundered, but they take foreign information laundering processes and disseminate it, translate it and disseminate it, amplify without furthering laundering it through domestic audiences. So, I mean, I would say that also regarding the main topics utilizing information laundering processes targeting the Nordic Baltic region, we find that the main topic basically is NATO's activity in general and NATO military exercises in particular. For example, Trident Juncture 2018 held a particular relevance in Latvia, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And also we find the opportunistic exploitation of human errors and misconduct of NATO soldiers as one of the main topics or stories targeted by information laundering actors. This would be an overview of the conclusions of the study.
Okay, thank you. We already have some questions from the audience, and some of them are clearly for Belén, so I'll just read them out, and if Belén, if you could answer them, that would be very useful. So first of all, very interesting framework. How was the core information tracked through the laundering process, such that it was known that it was being followed through the framework? And can this framework work throughout the full information tools?
Well, thanks. I'm glad that they find the framework interesting. I say just like how, if I haven't understood well, the question is like how we trace information, like a piece of information through the laundering process, right? And so what we did was just like we identified as several key indicators that allowed us to see that that one actor was picking the information from the previous source and so on. So for example, we have the indicator of repetition, of chronology. Like chronology is the main indicator, that is like the same, like the pieces of content are published within a very short time frame, and they hold like structural similarity. So these are or similar or mainly identical. Then we also have a criteria of repetition. If we see an actor that is participating in the information laundering process and has just shared a laundered piece just after another actor did, and after another actor laundered the information, and we see just like this actor repetitively have participated in previous information laundering process research, we find that as an indicator that probably this would be like this actor would be taking part of the laundering process again. And yeah, so we established a series of indicators that they are explained in detail in the publication, and this allows us to organize chronologically and trace what happens to the information through the framework that we have shown a while ago, through the 3 phases, and how it gets distorted, how different actors intervene, how other actors participate from source magnification process. That would be just like what I was saying, that's like the pure amplification of the laundered information without further modification. And finally, how it gets picked by the audience and forms part, integrates in the public discourse. I don't know if I have.
I think you have answered the first part of the question. The second part was, can this framework work throughout the full information environment tools? I'm not sure what full information environment tools mean here, but my guess would be, can you integrate this framework in information environment monitoring effort that is done by automated tools? Some of that Nika mentioned. So where you okay, I'll take the lead and translate this question for you. So do you think the framework could be integrated and automated in a tool?
Yes, that was what I was thinking.
Will it have to remain forever manual work?
I mean, I think that as Nika said, we can. There are some components of this this framework and in, like some parts of the process that of research of information laundering activities that could be automated. For example, just like tracing how in smurfing cases is the artificial amplification in social media, or how just like the same author is disseminating the same piece of content in different media platforms. That could be automated, but we always need to, I think that this framework requires manual verification too, because like it is, well, I don't think that it's a very sophisticated framework that needs to be verified. And of course, we don't want to make mistakes by saying just like, okay, this actor is participating from the information laundering process when it is not. So manual verification would be essential, but of course, there are some parts of this process that can be automated.
Yes, okay, thank you. A question for both of you came from the audience as well. So how do you define hostile activity? Maybe we can start with Nika. How does DRFLab defines hostile activity?
Yes, we define hostility based on the values that the organization protects or defends with its activities. And these values are public health, security, economic security, democracy, and human rights. If we see that activities online are deliberately undermining one of these values or other values that are related and we find valuable, then we see it as a malign intent that we need to report on.
Okay, so and Belén, how was hostile activity defined within the project?
Okay, I think that this was one of the challenges that we found in our research, because accidental actors are also an important part of information laundering processes. So how we distinguish accidental actors from other actors that are actually enabling the spread of pro-Kremlin influence within the domestic media environment. So what we identify was just like a criteria of are they utilizing information laundering techniques that suggest coordination, for example, Potemkin villages. When I speak about Potemkin villages, I speak about a series of actors that are constantly reinforcing each other by publishing and endorsing what their content that the other one publishes. So if actors are constantly and repetitively participating from information laundering processes and perpetrating and applying these techniques that suggest that, okay, there is some sort of coordination. For example, smurfing cases also, just I think that smurfing is very indicative of an intention to increase artificially the visibility of the laundering piece on digital environment. So if we see that these practices are constantly perpetrated, then we deduce that there is some sort of malign intent behind. And of course, it's like information, as I said previously, information laundering actors are generally supported by cyber capabilities. So if we identify that an actor has, for example, posted a forged letter or has created fake personas or whatever, like this is just like there's just like a meditated, you know, like it's a prepared action to launder this piece of content, and therefore we will understand that there was some sort of malign intent behind. But of course, it's very important that in information laundering to separate those actors that are participating from the process unwillingly from those that participate from the process willingly. And in information laundering cases, especially in the most complex ones, we find both. Yeah.
Okay, some very good points. So we still have a lot of questions from the audience. One question, I think it's for Belén. It reads as, how does this, so the proposed framework, how does this differ from network nodal analysis and use of misattribution as a propaganda technique?
Okay, so how does this use of the use of this framework differs from could
nodal analysis? Yeah, sorry.
Nodal analysis. Yeah, so I think that this framework basically it's a way of researching hostile information influence activities and identifying patterns and certain actors that participate within a hostile information influence campaign. So it's just like it can present similarities to another research methodologies, of course, but the metaphor of money laundering allows us to apply techniques that are used to launder money, to launder information, and also to further develop the techniques utilized with other research that is available. So I think that, I mean, the framework is basically is a tool, and yeah, it's basically that.
Yes. So one of the comments that we kept hearing from both Nika and Belén is that the analysis is very much restricted by the information that's available, and that is very well, that makes attribution, actor detection very complicated. So we have one question from the audience that says, well, do you think the Digital Services Act will, when the new act comes in force, will facilitate greater access to specific platform data that you need to do this sort of analysis? Any takers for this question? I mean, if so, the Digital Services Act, well, the new revision, the aim of it is to create safer digital spaces where all users of the digital spaces' rights are protected, and also to it will basically set a rule set for protecting rights in the people's rights in digital spaces, but also rules that will foster innovation, growth, and competitiveness in European single market and globally. Do you think, I mean, this question kind of assumes that you know by heart the Digital Services Act, but do you think will it come with some benefits to the sort of analysis that both Belén and you and Nika do?
I can take that one. The general trend currently is towards privacy and security, as opposed to openness, but not that openness is completely eliminated. No, it's just that now we are in process of finding the right balance, and the Act seems to aiming just towards that. So the biggest complaint after Facebook disabled its graph search in June 2019 was that legitimate researchers cannot do their work anymore, and there was big outrage. But at the same time, the tool, the graph search, helped stalkers and other malign actors to actually affect physical security of Facebook users. So we cannot advocate for one or another, because transparency and privacy are, though opposed, but also both very important aspects that facilitate security in general, both individual and collective security. So if we find the right balance, once the Act is revised, approved, the discussion should continue, because it's never-ending process. And currently, there are ideas of how to allow more data for certified researchers, whereas limiting data that's available for everyone openly with no restrictions, no track records of, and no responsibility of how this data is used or misused.
Okay, thank you. So we still have many questions from the audience, but they are moving into the solution part of the discussion. So so far we've spoken about information laundering. What is it? How we can detect it? What are the challenges and benefits of the proposed methodology for analyzing information laundering? But of course, the reason why we're all here is to understand how this can be used later on to disrupt these information laundering activities, influence campaigns, and then mitigate the harms and risks they create. So I guess we can switch to discussing more the solutions. So of course the panelists are still, more focusing on research and analysis, but we'll try and do our best in answering the solution-oriented questions. So first of all, do you know if there's a clear international legal framework that could be used to act against this kind of hostile activities? Any takers for this question?
So if there is an international legal framework that allows to counter these types of activities?
Yes,
is
exactly.
that the question? Yes, so I think that we are not there yet, but we are, efforts are being made to reach to that level, and hopefully that point will come sooner than later. I would say that that, as Nika just mentioned, we are trying to find the right balance, and we are trying to find the right balance, and the discussion should be ongoing. So now, for example, we have the Digital Services Act, right? And then we need to see how this benefits the research, and therefore just like the ability to conduct preemptive research, to inform national institutions of what's going on in the online media environment, and to develop strategies to counter and mitigate this sort of techniques and practices. So my reply to the question is we are not yet, but we are just like going towards that direction.
And I guess one of the challenges that you face in analysis with actor attribution are the same challenges that you know, any legal effort or framework would face. I mean, it's very hard to prove someone is someone online, or even to prove, as you both of you mentioned, like malign intent or things like that. So it's even if there was a ready-made legal framework, it's very hard to prove things that would be necessary for legal action. Nika, do you have anything to add to this question?
No, I think you're just right. We are still looking for the best solution, because if we just pass an act that says disinformation should be forbidden, then how can we tell that if something that at a certain point of time we consider to be true, but changes afterwards, is true? You know, we cannot punish for lying, and lying is actually also one of our human rights and part of discussion. Disturbing one, but still it's a part.
Yes, definitely. There are some implications for free speech when thinking about acting against these hostile activities or disinformation. So another question in the solution oriented question bucket. So do you think, is there a way, like in your opinion, is there a way to build populations' resiliency towards information laundering, and or can societies or governments only debunk and counter these activities? So do you think there is a way to build resiliency other than debunking and countering?
Yes, definitely. I would say that that we can build resilience in society. I mean, we are not there, but we are taking the efforts towards that direction. Like the awareness that this information exists and that the information influence activities are actually a threat to our societies has grown in the previous years, and it's growing, and it's like everybody now is aware that there are actors that willingly and some of them unwillingly are trying to manipulate audiences to suit their purposes. So with this awareness, we are starting just developing initiatives to counter and to mitigate the effects. I think that societies can build online resilience mainly first understanding their vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities intrinsic to their domestic media environments, and then developing and educating critical thinking in population in order to distinguish, for example, reliable from unreliable sources, and just identify misleading headlines, sensationalized headlines. And of course, it's like this is just a progressive process. I mean, media literacy doesn't come from that doesn't happen from one year to the next one. But there are like some countries that even are introducing education and critical thinking and media literacy in the schools. And I think that this is very important. I mean, and I think that once we are aware that this is a threat, and once we take the steps to counter it and to mitigate it, then we can build resilience progressively, and that's the point we are in.
So to summarize, understanding the vulnerabilities of specific society and specific country's media environment, building awareness of these information laundering processes and information influence activities, and then developing critical thinking and media literacy skills in the population. Nika, do you have anything to add to these 3 points for building resiliency?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, on top of that, I'm a big advocate of strategic communication and having your own story, because the most resilient society is the one that has its own story. Disinformation oftentimes taps into emptiness, taps into voids. So if we fill this void with a comprehensive story of our own, the external actor, it would be very hard to penetrate. But it takes time to build such story and to win hearts and minds. And the the communication should be followed by action. That's why it's long-term approach, but the best one to get immune against external narratives, actors that aims to undermine our own choice and story of say our nation. So that would be my main answer to how to build resilience.
Okay, so excellent points. Okay, let's, for example, information laundering and information influence activities are happening. There is no resilience in the society. How do you think governments, people, or NGOs, or anyone really, how should we react towards these specific information laundering cases or activities? What's the best way to react to them?
So the best way to react to them is, I would say that mainly, basically monitor them. The application of the information laundering framework allows to draw like a very comprehensive picture of what's going on within domestic media environment or within an information influence campaign. So, for example, utilizing this or other methods to research and to monitor, to keep monitoring, well, the actors that generally participate from these processes, or the how media react and how media produces and broadcasts certain types of events or events related to specific topics that have been uncovered. Like, for example, our research on information laundering uncovers like topics that are most used or most targeted by information laundering actors. So now, having that information, it's about just building a system to monitor this process, and then that progressively, will help the national institutions to build capabilities and to create some sort of awareness about just like how to manage and like inform their policy strategies to counterfight them or monitor. I would say.
Okay, Nika, do you have anything to add on how to best react to information laundering?
Sure. Well, monitoring and knowing what's happening is a very important part, but we cannot stop there. The easiest way, of course, is thinking about debunking. And I think the mistake that's oftentimes made is repeating the wrong narratives in order to say they are saying this wrong thing. Actually, it's like that. It becomes especially complicated when you try to say if something exists or not, because if someone alleges that deep state exists and you're saying that no, there is no such thing as deep state, it just ends there. And the best is, again, to have your own strategic communication talking points, and monitoring will help you to see what aspect of the story that's now being challenged you should answer. Provide your own information, provide your own explanations, and people will be able to connect the right dots if you provide enough of them. So the worst thing is to have emptiness that's filled with disinformation, because once people buy into disinformation narratives, it's hard to convince them. But once people buy into strategic communication narratives that are aimed for national liberties, prosperities, and other things that help to make our life better for the future, it's also hard to penetrate them. So you have to have your own story, you have to have your own storytellers, and that's, again, long-term approach that needs to be consistent and that needs to have resources, of course. But the worst thing to do is to amplify wrong narrative just because it's wrong. We need to think more strategically and long-term.
So monitoring, correct debunking, and strategic communications are some of the suggested reactions to information laundering. Another question. So you spoke about resources and long term. One of the questions we received from audience was how nations and organizations and individuals can expose information laundering and educate societies if they don't have the same resources as, for example, other countries and other governments. Any takers for this question?
So how some countries can respond to information laundering processes if they don't have the same resources?
Yes, like, for example, the research that you worked on, I mean, it's a long and hard work that maybe governments don't, like currently don't have resources to do themselves to address information laundering in their countries.
I think that, I mean, the cooperation between governments and like internationally, but also just like the cooperation with private companies that are just like focused on the research of this information, it's key. I mean, like there are like plenty of organizations that are very good at monitoring and social media analyzing, you know, like strategic communications, and these companies can provide a great value to support the lack that some national institutions might face if they don't have the capabilities that others have. So I would say just like cooperation to compensate your lacks, it's ideal. And I think that, I mean, right now we have like a lot of access to online media sources, and that are just like, I mean, online monitoring and online research is easy to do, is cheap. And I mean, it's widespread. So I'm sure that there are like brilliant people there that can produce wonderful work.
Okay, so yeah. So well, this question raises a great answer and point. I mean, there's a lot of cooperation ongoing, international, and some of this work is actually open source. So just not having the resources or capabilities in-house doesn't mean you cannot have access to this knowledge. And of course, that also brings us to the main point. I mean, you just have to allocate resources. I mean, this is a problem, and this is a problem that endangers our democracies, and we need to allocate resources if there aren't any, and be it outsourced or in-house, but they just need to be here. We have very little time left. Do we have time for another question? Yes. Okay. So there's one specific question. I'll ask it to both of you. So, are clickbait titles used by mainstream media causing people to look for alternative sources of information, thus widening the space for hostile sources to grow? Nika, maybe.
Yes, I would.
Oh, sorry. Or Belén.
No. Go for it, Nika.
Yes, I would say that bad journalism contributes towards disinformation. Clickbait, sensationalist, it helps to generate money, but it also oftentimes creates unnecessary panic. I'd say that vaccines is now the topic that's being exploited the most, with the most dangerous effects. So yes, definitely bad journalism is bad journalism being a journalism is not an excuse. So, Belén, do you have something to add?
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. I would say just like the integrity in journalism is essential to create resilience against information influence activities. And right now, I mean, sensationalized headlines, what they do is they polarize society, and they also prompt like audiences to look for other sources. So yes, self-due diligence in journalism is something that we need to encourage to fight these kind of processes.
Okay, so I guess that's another point. Strengthening journalism and strengthening media would help first building resiliency towards information laundering activities and information influence capabilities, and then of course, helping to react in these cases, because of course media themselves can react to information laundering cases. Our time is up. Thank you for joining us for the discussion. We hope to see you next week for the next webinar, which is protecting armed forces on social media. It's supposed to be very, very interesting. So please, thank you for joining us today, and please join us again next week on 10th of February at 4 p.m. Thank you.